Hi everyone, this is Dr. Fanie van Rooyen for TechCentral. I'm the Deputy Editor, and today we're speaking to Stephen Boykey Sidley, who is a partner at Bridge Capital, heading up the Future Advisory. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so Stephen, you've been called an author, an animator, chief technology officer for a Fortune 500 company, jazz musician, software developer, video game designer, private equity investor, and high technology entrepreneur. That is quite a mouthful. Can you maybe just give us some brief background about yourself and how does that all fit together?
Yeah, probably the most important piece, because I haven't updated that for a while. I've been a professor of practice at the University of Johannesburg for the past 4 years, and in that role, I interacted with a very large number of people across the technology sphere, mainly in artificial intelligence and crypto. But basically, the background to that is that I have a short attention span and I keep bouncing around from one thing to another. I started with a master's of computer science a long time ago. And then moved into various other things, such as being a CTO for a Fortune 500 company, and then moving into various different aspects of technology right across all the way from AI to crypto to enterprise systems. And wrote about 8 books along the way, 2 of them about Bitcoin and crypto. And right now I'm a columnist for Daily Maverick and Currency News and Daily Friend, and I have a book coming out in October, and I do these sorts of forums quite often, and they're lots of fun.
Great stuff. Thank you so much. Right, so let's get into it. You recently wrote for Financial Mail about the X402 payments layer, popularized by Coinbase, or most recently. And TechCentral recently wrote about the launch of OpenUSD as a complement, a stablecoin complement to X402. So maybe in brief, what is X402?
All right. So if you'll indulge me to go into a bit of internet history, because it's absolutely crucial understanding how X402 came to be. When the internet was being developed, and that is prior to its sort of coming out in the mid-90s, the protocol had a bunch of things that allowed people to build upon it. For instance, JPEG and MP3 and MP4 and FTP and HTTP, and there are a whole bunch of things that people built on top of the protocol, and they finally got absorbed into the standard. None of those had anything to do with money. And the question has to be asked, well, why wasn't money an intrinsic part of the internet right from the beginning? And the answer turns out to be that the internet was funded by the Defense Agency Research Program of the United States. And it was never supposed to be a commercial enterprise. So if anybody had at the time said, hey, we need something native to the internet to represent money, it would have been turned down anyway. So it was not a concern of any of the people involved. When it became apparent very quickly post-1995 that we needed to pay for things, including AOL and all the old guys, the way that was handled is, okay, put in your credit card number and we'll sort it out at some bank back end, which is what happened. And there were lots of scams at the time, and then they started encrypting the credit card numbers, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, what people had not realized is some very smart people in 1995 had reserved a code called X402, which was a payment-related statement, has to be paid or had been paid. It was just left empty by everybody. And by the time the 2000s and 2010s rolled around, people started looking at this field with the Internet Protocol and saying, hey, maybe we can use this for payment, but nobody knew how. Which brings us directly to crypto payments. Crypto on a parallel track was developing, all actually from much earlier than 1995, but it heated up in the 90s and early 2000s and eventually culminated with a white paper on Bitcoin in 2010. And that led directly to the creation of the stablecoin. I think it was 2016 or 17 around there, the very first stablecoin called DAI. To where we are today, where there is many stable coins, and it is now so widely accepted within the traditional financial community that nobody really much talks about, the fact that this came all the way back from blockchain and crypto and all those, used to call themselves the cypherpunks from the 1990s. The advent of stablecoin, which is a crypto token directly tied to the price of the dollar and other currencies, but it started the price of the dollar, turned out to be the perfect methodology to take advantage of this field that was in the internet called X402. And the marriage of these two things has allowed payment to now be native on the internet, because you can simply use USDC, for instance, one of the biggest, or Tether, the two biggest stable coins, as your payment methodology. To flip this have been paid switch. And it is frictionless, it is free, there's no transaction costs associated with it, etc., etc., etc. So it takes advantage of the best of both worlds of the internet, which has obviously a distribution of most people on Earth, and crypto payments, which is secure, free, fast, blah, 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 permissionless. So X402 is now being widely used, or will be widely used, as payment on the internet, in contrast to sending your credit card number, which is still awkward, expensive. There are bank fees, there are fees to Visa, etc., etc. It has just started. As you said, Coinbase was the first one to launch. I think it was 6 months ago, somewhere around there. But X402 will now become widespread enough for it to disappear into just basically a commodity once stable coins become widely used.
Great. And so with the launch of OpenUSD, which is now backed by quite a lot of big financial players, do you think this is the moment for this to happen, for the X402 plus the stable coins to finally create a new economy for the internet?
Yes, this is their coming out party. This is X402's bar mitzvah. It's becoming a man.
Excellent. Right. So, what do you think? What do you think is the play, or the?
I just sorry, Fanie, I need to back up in case some of your listeners, maybe I jump over some things because I'm so close to it. But the reason why this is important is that payment represents the rails on which societies operate. You want something, you pay for it, okay? And payment rails have been the unquestioned colony of financial institutions, either the banks or the payment card corporations like Visa and MasterCard. And you pay a lot of rent to those companies in order for them to govern and oversee a payment. So if I need to pay you, I've got to go through my bank. If I need to pay Pick and Pay, you've got to use my credit card. That costs money. There's computers and there's salaries that have to be paid and there are profits that have to be made to public companies, etc., etc. Nobody has ever questioned that. The first time it became under question was when DeFi, this new beast, arrived, which was suddenly mimicking the sort of things that banks did. But most importantly, you could achieve a separate set of rails in which there was no rent paid, nobody overseeing it, nobody policing it, and nobody monitoring. I pay you directly and there's nobody in between. X402 on stablecoins enables that to happen. And what it does is it cuts out the traditional financial institutions. Now, as you know, there was an enormous amount of resistance over the past 10 years from traditional financial institutions against all this crypto payment malarkey. First, they dissed it, and then they laughed at it, and now all of a sudden it's become obvious to them that this is a more secure, faster, more frictionless technology, and now they've started to accept it. In the past couple of years, most of the big banks around the world have accepted stablecoins. Legislation moves somewhat slower. As you know, there's all sorts of things going through the American Congress now with the Clarity Act and the Genius Act, etc., etc. But this is a big deal because it takes payment back to a methodology where nobody is looking at your payment. And number one. Number two, it's happening extremely fast and securely. And number three, it is so inexpensive as to be essentially free.
Yeah, exactly. But that is exactly what my next question is going to be, is how does stablecoins fit into what will happen to the traditional payment rails like Visa and MasterCard? because they have also been buying into stable coins to a large extent. I think because they saw that they had to. But I mean, that will definitely eat into their lunch, right? So how will that play out?
Yeah, so I would love to be a fly on the wall inside the boardrooms of MasterCard and Visa and the banks and payment corporations, because what this essentially does, as you said, not only does it eat into their margins, it completely eats their margins for lunch. You can do a payment for fractions of a cent, what used to cost you dollars. And I suppose that if I was them, the only thing that I would have left is the power of my brand, number one. Number two, and this is an incredibly important one, the ability for you to contest a payment. With a true stablecoin payment through crypto, I pay you directly or I pay a vendor directly. Once that money's gone, it's gone. You don't have the ability to say I made a mistake or this is a scam or can you check this or can you resolve this? And with Visa, you know now if you get scammed, you call Visa or you call your bank and they look into it. And if it's a scam, you get your money back. They will be providing that service. That service does not natively exist within stable coins and crypto. That's the service that is provided by the service provider. They are a risk manager and they take a risk. And the risk that they take is a risk that something goes wrong and you pay for that service. That's how they're going to make their money.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But now the South African Reserve Bank this week proposed a ban basically for companies not to be allowed to send crypto across borders. So, there's already been Vala and Luno has spoken out against this. What is your opinion of that? And I mean, that seems to be going backwards to what everything else is going with stable coins and with, more advanced, better payments. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I have been not only vocal in previous policy proposals around crypto, to the extent of writing a 25-page paper for the last one and submitting it as under public consultation. Then this thing arrives and, I had to wait for the smoke to stop coming out of my ears. I got so upset about it. But I'll have to say I didn't read it as carefully as the other ones because as soon as it arrived, as soon as it hit the internet, I saw people like Vazard from Vala and various others saying, are you guys completely crazy? Have you lost your marbles? Now, it used to be that the South African Reserve Bank, when I had dealings with them, or haven't had for a while, had some very smart people in and they knew what was coming and they understood the advantages of these new technologies. At least one of those people is still there. And I called him, he's a friend, and I said, have you seen this thing? And he said, what thing? And I said, well, there's this proposal that has come out to try and block crypto payments across borders, etc. And he said, what? Now he's in charge of part of this stuff, right? So he went rushing off. He called me back immediately, said, oh my God, this thing has happened sort of outside of consultation within the South African Reserve Bank. And I'm embarrassed. I don't know what to tell you. So it is my, and I can only say this because it's second or third hand information. And, I'm a journalist, so you don't want to deal with second and third hand information. But it seems as though this thing was knee jerked, was not done with proper consultation within the South African Reserve Bank or with any other expertise. And now they're going to say, okay, the public, you can now comment, and those comments will go into a file which will never be looked at. And this thing will be shoved in front of our legislators who don't understand a thing about the stuff, and it will be passed, probably. And what will happen is that the crypto industry in South Africa will just shut down, other than people holding on to Bitcoin for price appreciation reasons, but the payment leg of it will be, let me not say shut down, will be severely hobbled. Now, maybe there will be cooler heads and smarter people who go back to the authors of this thing and say, you guys are going in the opposite direction from the rest of the world. What in the world are you doing? This is not the future. This is the past. Whether anybody is prepared to listen to those very wise objections and whether they can be articulated simply enough for the legislators to understand, I don't know. But this is a great crisis in the way that the world of future finance, the rails that the real world of future finance is clearly on, except for South Africa is now taking a side track into the Bunde. Okay, and that will get lost.
So frustrating. Thanks for that. Okay, changing gears a little bit, what do you think about Bitcoin versus stable coins? Because Bitcoin kind of was there first, and then stable coins became much more accepted, and mass adoption of stable coins seems to be happening, and Bitcoin very much more slowly.
Yeah, so the original Bitcoin paper, the Satoshi paper, in which the very first sentence or second sentence talks about, in fact, I think it's in the title, an electronic payment system. And it turns out to not be the way that it is unfolded. It has become a store of value like gold,
Mm.
although you can pay for it, and you can pay for it in surprising places, like on various airlines. You can book your ticket with Bitcoin. It's not a problem. And the reason why it has not become a payment system is, number one, its volatility made it unacceptable to people who were getting paid. So if there was a time delay between the payment time that you paid and the time that it was received, um, there was a chance that the volatility would kill you. Even if there wasn't a time delay, you did not want to be paid in a token that could go up or down 5% in a single day. So that killed it on the payment side. The stablecoin did not have that problem. The stablecoin was locked to the value of the dollar, or whatever other currency it was locked to. So the payer and the payee could be confident that the value that was being exchanged over an electronic exchange would remain the same and would not be volatile and would be stable and would move at the slow pace at which currencies move, not at the fast pace at which ideologically based tokens like Bitcoin move. Which brings me to the third point, which is a positive for Bitcoin. Stablecoins are being swallowed up by the traditional financial industry, which means that KYC will apply, which means that in order to move these things around, people are going to want to know who was moving these things around, which means if you're going to move them around, you've got to sign up with Luno and give your ID and address and blah, blah, blah. Bitcoin remains KYC free. Bitcoin is still private and confidential and almost completely outside of the financial system. That makes it extremely attractive for those people who want that. And so I expect it will remain an alternative asset, along with the many alternative assets out there. I doubt that it will ever become the sort of payment rails that stablecoins have become, but I do believe in its long-term appreciation as a hedge against, in my mind, and this may attract some controversy, the lesser gods of gold and real estate.
Okay, well, even as a store of value, as digital gold, I feel or I find, I actually recently wrote an op-ed that mass adoption still seems very slow. I mean, it's been 17 years, and in terms of the characteristics of sound money or hard money, Bitcoin is clearly better technology. So why is it that only, I think it's about 3 or 4% of the global population that currently yet owns Bitcoin? Why do you think it's so slow? The other thesis I've heard is that it's actually fast in historical terms because other forms of money or gold took hundreds of years to be properly established globally. So we are still early in that sense, but to people who like and hold Bitcoin, it feels very slow.
Correct. And I'm one of those. I got in 2017 at a very low price.
Same.
And for those of us who got in early, we have a fantastic return. But I want to go back to your second point, in which in the long lens of history, this adoption has been the fastest adoption in history. You've got 3 or 4% of the world holding Bitcoin from none 15 years ago. That is really, really fast. The real question is, does it grow at a pace which will get it to 15, 20, 50% of holdings? And the answer is probably not, for the very reasons that I talked about, is that its lack of KYC keeps it in a fairly adversarial position to the world of traditional finance and governments. And as a consequence, I believe it will remain an alternative asset. What do I mean by that? What percentage of investment will go into this new thing? So as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, no money managers, no banks, no institutional governors would allow any investment in Bitcoin. Now, if you go to any of the major banks around the world, they are now saying, yeah, you should allocate 2 or 3% of your portfolio to this thing, a high risk asset. But we now believe it's a real asset, and we'll do your low risk stocks and bonds up at the top end, and safety deposits and T-bills, and then at the exciting and risky end, we'll 2 or 3%. If you had to have 3% of the world's wealth go into Bitcoin, the price would be very, very much higher than it is now. Will it ever take over? No. It remains in an alternative asset space, unless there's something I'm missing about the future. It is a better store of value than gold on every level that you can possibly think of. Gold is simply a rock that people have decided, or a mineral that people have decided has value, and it's a better store of value than currency, because a currency is as good as the promises of your government, and that didn't work out too well in Venezuela and Lebanon and Cyprus and Zimbabwe, etc., etc. So there is a real argument for it, and I do not think it will ever be dominant, at least not in my lifetime.
So let me see.
By the way, the passing of the Clarity Act, and your podcast here is probably days premature here, because I think it's happening next week. I think there is a vote scheduled next week in the Congress or in the Senate. I'm not sure. The Clarity Act will act as a nuclear fuel underneath the acceptability of Bitcoin. It's absolutely critical, because the Clarity Act basically situates Bitcoin as something now that is surrounded by a set of governance, and then banks breathe out and said, okay, we're not dealing with something that may be banned tomorrow by the American government. There it is. It's got a set of laws around it. We're going to let the banks play with this as much as they want. And then what happens when that happens is Europe follows, and Japan follows, and India follows, etc. It's a big deal, this Clarity Act. If Clarity does not pass, the Bitcoin price will remain depressed until next year, this time, when they start arguing the stuff again. If it does pass, I expect the price to start rising again. It will not rise parabolically like it used to in the mid-teen to 2010 to 2020. Those parabolic moves are completely over. They were bubble driven, but it will rise faster than it's rising now. In other words, I expect it to hit an all-time high in the next year if Clarity passes.
Makes a lot of sense. Right. So let's talk a bit about AI. Everyone is talking about AI for obvious reasons. It's changing everything, and it's probably one of the most revolutionary technologies humanity's ever had. But there's so much said about it. I would like to know from you, what do you think is not talked about enough when it comes to AI and how it's being developed?
Yeah. Once again, just a little bit of context. This is personal context. I took the first AI course ever offered in Africa at Wits many decades ago. He was an English professor, and went down the rabbit hole absolutely immediately. AI was not mature in those days, and was very excited about this, and finally published an academic paper with that professor in 1990 something. When I had one of my big birthdays, ones with the O at the end, in 2000, I think it was, I had a big birthday party, and I stood up to say my speech. And one in my speech was, I took stock of the things that had happened in the last 10 years. And one of the things that I said was, and I had an academic paper published in the Annals of AI. It was an American academic journal, which I considered to be like something that I was proud of for the previous 10 years. The audience at my party burst out laughing. The reason they burst out laughing is none of them had ever heard of artificial intelligence. So they thought I was making a joke. Okay, that's 16 years ago, and now the entire
insane.
planet has heard of artificial intelligence. Okay, so to your question directly, Fanie, what is not being talked about? We know what is being talked about, so let's start there. As usual with new technologies, the things that are being talked about are the darker and more frightening edges of the new technology. This is true of all technology. From genetic engineering, people have to sell newspapers. That means we're going to make mutants, to nuclear, to the internet's going to gobble up all the electricity in the world, which is a Fortune magazine headline in 2001. I think everybody wants to talk about the dark sides. And the truth of the matter is there are dark sides to all technology, but they get if the technology does something useful or can do something useful, that is the narrative that usually dominates, and then the thing becomes not talked about anymore. So where are we with AI? We're directly at the point in AI where everybody is talking about the bad stuff, and there is plenty, man. We know that. We know that it's going to supercharge the worst of social media. We know that its excellence in understanding and speaking language is going to allow it to have an enormous amount of influence on elections, because it's now very good psychologically at understanding pressing the buttons that people don't realize are being pressed and nudge them in a certain direction. It's going to push people out of various professions very, very quickly. We have personal experience in our larger social group, and graphic artists and copy editors and blah, 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 blah. There's just no space for them anymore. And this goes up the chain very, very quickly to lawyers and accountants. And even if you've been following in the last couple of months, even mathematicians are now going to find AI encroaching on the stuff that was very, very precious to them, very upsetting to them. And to me, that's something that we considered at the pinnacle of human intellectual development now looks as though it's going to have a competitor / collaborator to mathematicians. Okay, so everybody knows the bad side.
Moment.
Yeah. So let's talk about the side that's not being talked about enough. There are two, in my view. The first is science, and the second is education. Science, the human endeavor of science, which has to do with humans being curious, seeing a problem, coming up with what they think is a solution to that problem or an explanation of that problem, publishing it, letting other people verify it and knock it down. That is the scientific enterprise. Okay? That has been the scientific enterprise for as long as humans have been doing science, particularly in a university environment. So you've got some professor, Einstein would be obviously the canonical example, but anybody you look at a certain field and you say, I wonder why that happens, and then you come up with a solution either in theory or experiments, and then you put it down on paper and other people tell you whether they agree or not. That is now being assisted in ways that could not have been imagined even 2 years ago by vast advances enabled by AI. You mentioned, which one was it, AlphaFold or Alpha Protein or one of those?
AlphaFold, yeah.
The Alpha Protein, for your viewers who may not know about Alpha Protein is a child of chess, a chess program by Demis Hassabis, followed by AlphaGo, which is a program to play the game of Go. It became the best in the world. The story of AlphaGo is the most complex game ever devised by humans. It makes chess look like checkers. It's really, really complex. And Go masters, particularly in Japan, are rock stars. Okay, if you're a Go master, you're a rock star. They're celebrities on the level of American basketball stars. So they set off a program to try to understand how to play Go. This is DeepMind, the people at DeepMind, Demis Hassabis. And it looked at millions of Go games, which are published they've been published for 100 years, fed them in, thing churned up, came up with generalized examples, and then beat the world's best Go player, a guy called Lee Sokol. And there's a very, very tragic scene that's on video. I think there's a Netflix program about it, when he stands up when he's lost the final match with his head down and he shuffles away and he says, I will never be playing Go again. That was the end of him. It's a very, very dramatic and emotional moment. They then went one step further and they said, well, we fed this thing a whole bunch of Go games and it learned how to play Go and became the best in the world. But maybe we didn't have to feed it any games at all. So they rewrote the thing, and they got it to play against itself. They gave it no rules. They gave it the game board, and they gave it the winning state. And they said go. And it became the best Go player in the world in about 48 hours. Or maybe it was 72. I can't remember the number, but it was days. Played against itself for days, played millions and millions and millions of games. That was a watershed moment for the AI application of unsupervised learning. Now, unsupervised learning is what now sits at the heart of much of the scientific experiment. So the next place they went is, well, we have this huge problem in the real world where people are dying of diseases and genetic damage which we can't control, and it all has to do with the way proteins work in the body. And one of the reasons why we can't solve any of this stuff is that the protein is this incredibly complex 3D object. And we don't know how it gets from a bunch of chemicals, where it starts, and folds up. And if only we knew how it folded up together, we may be able to tell when it folds incorrectly, not in the wet lab, but as a simulation. And if we can tell why and when it's folded incorrectly, perhaps we can find a way to correct the mistake. That's what alpha protein was. Now, to give you an example of what a revolution alpha protein was, it takes one scientist somewhere between 1 and 2 years to understand the 3D structure of one protein at a cost of between $1 and $2 million. Alpha protein, we've got 200 million of these proteins in our bodies, did all of them in weeks, all of them, the whole lot. Yeah. And then they opened the database to scientists. That sort of scale of the increment of knowledge was unavailable to human beings and would have been under calculation where all scientists for the next 10,000 years wouldn't have been able to do this. And it did it in weeks. So that scale is a beautiful example of where AI is making sort of almost indescribable difference in the way knowledge advances. You take the best of humans and their intuition, and you take the broad compute capabilities of AI and pattern recognition capabilities, etc., etc. By the way, this has got nothing to do with LLMs. It's a different part of AI. Okay?
There's a very good documentary by Google DeepMind on this whole everything you just described called The Thinking Game. Viewers can go have a look at that.
Yeah. I'll urge everybody to watch it. It's lots of, and it's already years old. So you can imagine, that's the dark ages. Yeah. I think that was produced 2 years ago, and what's happened in the last 2 years is extraordinary. So now this is crossed from bio stuff to chemical stuff to mathematics to physics to quantum mechanics. The enablement of a very vast, very fast increment in knowledge has not been talked about enough, because what that ends up happening on the other side of that, not 30 years from now, not 10 years from now, but perhaps a couple of years from now, is a cure for cancer. Why is a cure for cancer important? Not because it saves many lives and lots of human suffering. It's because it saves $80 trillion from the world's budget, which is used to treat cancer patients. It will solve the energy crisis by finding ways to get matter to produce energy at very low cost. It will solve the material crisis, not crisis. It will solve for material inefficiencies like the weight of stuff that you have to wrap an airplane in so that it doesn't fall apart in the sky. There is any science that you look at, there are a series of things that those scientists in those fields know have to be done and would have taken generations, and now they can think in months and years. Every time there's a big thing that happens, it sort of hits the newspapers and then goes away. And what's happening is this is happening every single day I read about the stuff. If anybody wants to keep in touch with how quickly AI is helping the science world, there is a guy called Alex Wisner, Wssner, Gross, who has a daily newsletter, only about 7 or 8 paragraphs, on LinkedIn. Just go to LinkedIn and type in Alex Wisner Gross, and he will give you the latest advances in the past 24 hours. And it is just astonishing to find out how quickly this is moving. Alex Wisner Gross. Okay, sure. So that's the one area where AI is not being... Yeah, as Alex Wisner Gross. He is also on a podcast called Moonshots, which is my favorite time of the week. When the Moonshots podcasts come out, I drop everything, and it's a 2-hour podcast, and I go walk in the hills of Fishhook. I listen to Moonshots to find out the latest stuff out there. The second one is education. Education is stuck in the same paradigm as it has been basically for hundreds, if not thousands of years. A bunch of students in a classroom and an expert at the top teaching them, okay? Then they've got to learn what the guy teaches them, and then they get tested, and that's how you find out that you know. That paradigm is inefficient in the extreme. It's inefficient because it treats all students in the room the same, where there are people who are stronger at some things and weaker at other things. Some may be better at mathematics or better at English, or they have short concentration spans. There's all sorts of strengths and weaknesses, and it's possible for a teacher to understand each of them. So you get people left behind, and you get very smart people who get bored. More importantly than that, I want to talk about an experiment that was done in Nigeria, and I can't remember the name of the state. And once again, this is also a couple of years old, maybe 18 months old. It was a middle school in Nigeria somewhere, so standard grade 8, 9, thereabouts. And they brought in a bunch of iPads with an AI tutor on it. And these kids not only couldn't speak English very well, they could speak English as well as an English-speaking grade 8 student can speak Zulu today. They're taking Zulu lessons, but they really couldn't do it conversationally. And on the screen was a prompt, like a ChatGPT prompt. And the teacher said, ask it a question. Doesn't matter if your English is bad, type in a question, okay? And the immediacy of the engagement was so powerful that the students didn't want to go home after class. They learned in 6 weeks, they learned 2 years of English, and their marks on every other single subject rocketed from basically failing into the 90s and hundreds. This experiment has now been more generalized. You've probably heard of a school called Alpha Schools, which is an American high school, which is completely AI-based. And here's the shocker. So it was a woman from Stanford and who started this, and she got lots of venture capital money, and then she built the whole school around the fact that an AI tutor can tutor you personally, so that when you run into a problem or you get an answer wrong, it'll say to you, "Oh, I see you've gotten this answer incorrectly. This is probably because you didn't understand what I said 2 weeks ago. So we're going to roll back a little bit so we can put this brick back in the bridge. And once we put the brick back in the bridge, I promise you'll be able to." The teacher can't do that for every student. No. So Alpha Schools in the States, the first thing is that the school day, or the teaching period of the day, is 2 hours. Go to the school at 8, and teaching is done by 10 o'clock. The rest of the day, they do stuff like how to collaborate with other humans, sports, play games, life stuff. I mean, the school day still ends at 3 o'clock, but they're doing fun stuff. They're playing games. They how to help other people, moral lessons, blah, 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 blah. And of course, it goes without saying that they've hit 99.9% or something in their results at the end of the year. Criticisms have been leveled in that it's quite expensive. That is a mechanical issue that can be solved. They have lots of bursaries. They're moving it to other countries. So Alpha Schools is a good example of how powerful the stuff is. And what it does is completely upend the way that education has happened for a long time, which is not to say that there'll be all sorts of bumps along the way, as we've seen now with people using AI to cheat at universities and schools, etc. But the future of education is AI-based. The future of science is AI-based. Those are the two areas you asked me to talk about, things that are not talked about enough. That's that.
Stuff. My next question then is, if so many jobs will be automated, what do we teach kids with this AI? Apart from reading and writing, wish I had... the basics. Career-wise,
yeah,
what do we teach kids?
Right. So I want to be as uncertain about this as it demands. So I'm certain about some things. I'm certain about science, and I'm certain about education. I'm extremely uncertain about what people are going to do with their time or how they're going to make their money. Musk talks fairly flippantly about we won't need any money by 2035. He said that last week. Other people say, well, we won't have to work because, robots will be doing the physical drudgery and AI will be doing the intellectual work. And the question is then, what does it mean to be human? It comes down to a basic level of human. And I don't have a good feel for that. And I have to say that I oscillate between optimism and pessimism on this particular question.
Mm.
Nobody has a solution to this. Nobody understands how quickly it is happening. Nobody can prepare for if there is mass unemployment. There is no preparation for that because it's happening too fast. I mean, when the assembly line arrived, it was decades, there was some displacement. When the car arrived, horses had to be put out to pasture and horse drivers had to be put out to pasture. There was the slow migration of people to other industries. There was time to retrain. No time now. This thing is happening in a couple of years. And so while people know this is sort of on the horizon, nobody's come up with a good solution what people are going to do. On the other hand, if you read people like Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz, the world's largest venture capital company, or some of the others, I think the World Economic Forum is another, they talk about there will be an increment in employment of 92 million by 2030 because there's a whole class of jobs that do not exist now that will exist. The problem is perhaps, but they're not the sort of jobs that one can easily be retrained for. They're all techie sort of jobs.
Exactly.
So I think there will be a crisis in employment. Will it reach a point at which there is social mayhem? And that's what everybody's terrible of, the sort of unemployment that causes revolutions, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm sorry, Fanie, I don't have an answer for you on that.
I don't think anyone knows. That's one of the big questions right now, right?
Right.
Okay, so then approaching artificial general intelligence and the singularity, as they call it, what is your take?
So I want to sort of congratulate you publicly here for a very nice article that you put together in TechCentral, where you interviewed both me and Benjamin Rosen from Wits, where you encapsulated the issues perfectly over there. First of all, what is a singularity? There are a couple of different definitions, but the one that is fairly generally accepted, it is that point at which AI ceases to require us as a mentor and guider, and it takes off on its own and does its own stuff. So we don't have to teach it to write code. It knows how to write code. We don't have to teach it to do materials engineering or chemical engineering. It knows how to do that. And this is all based on what is already happening, which is why some people say the singularity has arrived, which is a concept called recursive self-improvement, RSI, where the software now knows how to improve itself without any interjection of any human request to do that. It simply improves itself. As a consequence of that, the next version of Claude will all be written by Claude. And then the next version of Claude will all be written by Claude. And the logical extension of that, will get to a point where humans don't understand what it is doing. I have some personal experience of this. In the last 3 weeks, I've been building this wildly ambitious project using Claude Code, where I asked it to code up some stuff for me, and I coded up some simple stuff, and I sort of skimmed through the code. I knew what it was doing, and then I asked it to start improving it, and I no longer know what it's doing. I tell it, okay, let's move in this direction. Let's move in. Why don't we try this? And it'll say, no, we've got to move in this other direction, and I think you're wrong about that. And it has come up with a design, and I keep saying to it, why did you do that again? What are you doing here again? This is something that I built, which I now don't understand. That's a consequence of the stuff. So that leads to two conclusions. So when the stuff is widespread, and by the way, the singularity will be spiky. It will certainly arrive in software engineering. It's already here. It may take a hell of a lot longer for it to arrive in medicine or some other field. But the core question, the nub of the singularity, is at the point where this thing has escaped our orbit and is self-approving of its own accord in a way that we don't fully understand, is it doing things that is good for us, or is it doing things that is bad for us? And that is where this entire field of AI alignment, it's a question of alignment. How do we ensure, we know this thing is going to improve itself to the point where we don't understand what it's doing, because it's much smarter, a million times smarter than any human being. That's fine, as long as you're not going to turn us into paperclips, as long as you're going to cure cancer when you're there. And so the alignment, yes, it shares our values. And there's a lot of discussion and a lot of proposals around that. And you've either got to face this thing with optimism and say people will find these rails to get this thing to line properly, or be a pessimist and say this thing is going to take off and turn us into paper clips one day, which is where a lot of people think it will happen, including a guy called Eliezer Yudkowsky, who wrote a book called If You Build It, We're All Going to Die. And he sets out a very evidenced argument, is that it's over for the human race. And when I give a lecture about that called We're All Going to Die, I do not get any invitations to dinner parties for quite a while after that. It's just a downer. But as I say, I oscillate between optimism and pessimism many times a day.
Good stuff. Same for me. On the one hand, it seems like there could be radical abundance like Musk keeps talking about. On the other hand, maybe not so much. So
maybe not so much,
knows.
That's, or abundance of the wrong things.
Yes, exactly. That's probably a great place to end for today, but I hope we can speak again soon. And thank you so much for joining us, Stephen.
Thanks, Fanie. It's been a pleasure.